Hi, I'm Adam,
This is Kevin.
and we are Tech Guys Who Invest. This is the place for business people and investors to learn all about investing. We offer a fresh perspective on what it's like to have a day job while investing, and we share lessons learned on our investing journey. Our vision is to educate and entertain you while adding tons of value to your daily commute. Welcome to our show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Tech Guys Who Invest podcast. On this episode, we are absolutely excited to bring you our first of many guests on this show. Adam and I had the privilege of interviewing our friend and real estate attorney, Shawn Yesner. Shawn Yesner is a Florida real estate attorney at Yesner Law, PL. Yesner Law was created to help homeowners, borrowers, consumers, and real estate investors buy, sell, protect, and preserve the single greatest asset someone will own in his or her lifetime, a home. The Yesner Law Firm are experienced Tampa bankruptcy lawyers that handle Chapter 7 and 13 bankruptcy, debt alternatives, and various real estate matters. Shawn M. Yesner has been practicing law since 1998. During that time, he has had the opportunity to represent thousands of consumers, lenders, and investors in Tampa and throughout Hillsborough County. Shawn is also the host of the Crushing Debt podcast, where he teaches people how to eliminate the financial bullies in their lives. He is also the author of the book Crushing Debt: 9 Strategies to Eliminate Financial Bullies, which is available on Amazon. So check out his podcast. And here is the interview between the Tech Guys Who Invest and Shawn Yesner.
Hey, Shawn, thanks for being with us. We're really excited to have you here.
Yeah. I appreciate the invitation. I'm a big fan of the show. I've been listening all the way back to episode number 1.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That makes you one of our most loyal fans, I think.
All almost double-digit episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Congratulations. I do enjoy the show, and I do listen to it when it comes out.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. So, hey, we want to start off with kind of a fun question. So we wanted to ask you, what's a piece of tech that stands out to you as a kid?
A piece of tech that stands out to me as a kid has to be the old style Atari with the one stick controller with the red button. The very first, actually, I think I had a Pong at some point in my life that we used to hook up to the black and white TV and I used to play. But the video game that I really remember, the piece of tech that I really remember, the one thing that popped into my head was that Atari.
Nice. Awesome. I remember playing that. Missile Command.
Yeah, maybe we've dated ourselves, but
right.
I'm a little young for that. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, that's awesome. So, Shawn, one of the reasons that we're excited to have you on is because you're an attorney, and it'd be great for us and our listeners if you start off by telling us what types of law you practice.
Yeah, sure. So, when I meet people at a networking event or whatever, I'll typically tell them one of two things. So the first line of business that really got me started was real estate law. And so from the Tech Guys Who Invest standard, I started doing residential and commercial closings. And that was how I got my start. It's a funny story because I came out of college with an accounting degree. And so I thought when I went to law school, I would work for the IRS or do something financial or whatever with my accounting degree. When I was in law school, I caught the litigation bug. And so I wanted to be a litigator and in court and objections and opening statements and closing statements. And the first guy out of law school that hired me was a real estate guy. So I do real estate law. The other area of practice that sort of the real estate tied into was at some point I started working at what we would call a foreclosure mill. So representing banks taking houses away. And I got really good at that. And I really enjoyed that area of the law. That exposed me to bankruptcy. I got a couple of appellate decisions that I got to argue and a couple of appellate decisions that were written that are in the books. And it led to all these other areas of law, but it also led me to helping people in foreclosure. So when the firm that I was at shut down, I switched sides, and instead of representing the banks, I'm representing people who are being foreclosed. And so that then led me to the real estate investor world, which then led me back into the consumer protection world. And so the other big part of my practice, which is the focus of the podcast and the focus of the book, is eliminating debt, is helping people get out of debt, is what I call eliminating. There it is. Kevin's got it. What I call eliminating the financial bullies in your life and getting rid of debt. So those are the two main areas, the real estate and then the consumer practice.
Okay, awesome.
Is being a lawyer anything like it is on TV?
No. No, I have friends of mine who are contractors, and they call it the HGTV effect. In other words, the thing I love Law and Order. I loved, The West Wing was one of my favorite shows. LA Law. Back in the day when I was studying for the bar exam, I would watch reruns of LA Law while I would study. And I love all those TV shows. But the problem is, someone comes into my office this morning. We're not in court this afternoon resolving the case. It takes time. A lot of the stuff that you see on TV is added for purposes of drama. It is not at all like, it is probably as funny as some of the sitcoms you see on TV, but it's not anywhere near what you see on TV.
Fair enough.
Shawn, I think you told us a little bit about the types of law you practice. Now, when did you know you wanted to really become an attorney?
In high school. I've known since high school that I wanted to be an attorney. And there's two different versions of the story, but they're pretty much the same. So I became an attorney out of spite. So one of the other things that a lot of people don't know about me is I've been playing drums since I was 10.
Oh, cool.
So my senior year of high school was broken into 9 classroom periods. One of those was lunch. So one was lunch, and then we had 8 classroom periods. Of those 8 classroom periods, I think 4 of those were band classes. So I was in concert band, I was in marching band, I was in orchestra. I think actually concert band and orchestra were the same period, just depending on what time of year. I was in the percussion ensemble class, and then I was in the color guard class. And I wasn't actually twirling the flags. I was in the color guard class because it was the class before the percussion ensemble class. And so it gave me extra practice time. And I was really on the fence between, do I want to become an attorney or do I want to go the other route and be a musician? But I knew that to be a musician, I would have to perform if I wanted to make the money that I wanted to make to support my family and do all that other kind of stuff. So the other thing in the background, I was always really good at numbers. My dad is a CPA, which led me to the accounting. But my senior year, one of those 4 academic classes that I took was the law. And within that class, we had our school's mock trial team. And the way that the teacher picked the mock trial team is she would have she had 3 classes during the day that were law classes, and each one of those classes did a mock trial. And then from that mock trial, she picked the best kids to be on the school's mock trial team. So my job was to be the direct examination of the plaintiff in the case that was assigned. And so I wrote out all the questions. I prepped the witness. I said, listen, here's where they may object, and here's how I think I'm going to try to handle it. And I had no idea what I was doing. This was my senior year of high school as a law class. And so we did the trial. And I don't even remember if we won or lost the trial. But what I remember is when it came time to pick the school's mock trial team, the teacher picked my plaintiff's witness because he did such a good job, and she didn't pick me. And I was like, well, I'll show you. And so I went to law school. But my family, we sort of grew up, we were not, I wouldn't say that we were rich by any means. We were comfortable. So my dad was a CPA. A lot of the men and women in my family are professionals. And so it was always this concept of, when I graduated high school, it wasn't, what are you going to do? It was, where are you going to go to college? And then when I graduated college and a lot of my friends went into the workforce, the expectation from my family was not, what kind of job are you going to get, but what advanced degree are you going to get? So I think that expectation was built into me even at a young age. So there was always this expectation that after college I was going to get some kind of an advanced degree. There were no lawyers in my family. It was something I enjoyed. There were a lot of good things to come out of that law class. I interviewed one of my dad's friends who was an IRS attorney and then turned the other way and helped people resolve IRS issues. And that really sort of caught my eye about something that I would want to do. And so, yeah, I think I've known since high school, I've known I wanted to be an attorney.
Now, when should an investor or a consumer actually decide saying, hey, I should get an attorney?
So I typically tell investors there's 2 times that you're going to need me. The first time is you want to structure the deal. So what type of entity should I form? Should I form an LLC? Should I form a corporation? Should I use a land trust? Should I use, a company or corporation from another state or an LLC in another state? How do I structure this? How do I set it up? Is it going to be subject to? Is it going to be a fix and flip? Is it going to be a buy and hold? What do I want my lease to look like? All those different, how do I want to make this thing work? Upfront structuring questions. That's the first time that an investor might need me. And I'll go through all that. And the one thing that I will do though is say, go see a CPA and figure out what you want your tax consequences to be, and that you make sure you understand the particular tax implications of the different decisions that you're going to make. Once the CPA gives you the tax structure, come to me and I'll put that corporate structure in place. And typically the CPA is going to tell you an LLC that's taxed like an S corporation, but they may have different advice depending on your different circumstances. But once the CPA says this structure, I'll then put that structure in place. The second time that the investor might need me is when something's hit the fan. So you've got the lease, but now the tenant's not paying and you need to evict. Or you bought a note, but now the homeowner isn't paying and maybe there needs to be a foreclosure on the note. Or maybe there's a quiet title issue because you're buying tax deeds. Or I helped an investor who bought a house in St. Pete that the city has targeted for demolition. So arguing to the city of St. Pete that we shouldn't demolish the house. So either up front, how do we structure stuff? Or at the end, oops, something's gone wrong. Shawn, what do we do? Help. Those are really the 2 times the investor is going to need me.
Okay.
Now,
So
when do they normally come? It's better to be preventive with a lawyer, but you kind of emphasize that they come and get you when when the poo-poo hits the fan, if you will.
Yeah, that's a difficult question because a lot of times they'll come to me and the newbie investor will come to me. They haven't bought their first house yet. And to put all that stuff in place and the LLC and the land trust and the S corporation and the taxes and the this and the that may overwhelm the beginning investor. A lot of times I like to simplify stuff and you don't need, I had one investor come to me that said, well, I'm going to do a land trust and the beneficiary of the land trust is going to be the LLC and the owner of the LLC is going to be another trust that's going to have this corporation that's going to do this. They got suckered into some guru, whatever. You don't need to, you don't own a house yet. You don't even own your own house yet. You're still renting an apartment. What are you setting up this complicated structure for holding property? So a lot of times I'll get with the new investor and let's put something simple in place, or let's wait till you're about to do your first deal. It only takes about a week or so to get an LLC up and running with the state of Florida.
Okay. Yeah, that's good information. Makes sense. Can you touch a little bit on the differences between an LLC and an S corp? I think a lot of investors hear those terms, and if they're pretty new to it, they may not know the differences, and even when it might be good to consider one versus the other, and just your take on that at a kind of a high level.
Yeah, sure. So both of them, either an LLC or a corporation, I'll start with just a corporation, either an LLC or a corporation are both going to give you that liability protection as long as you treat each like its own entity. So for example, as we record this, we're at the end of the month going into the beginning of the next month. Well, you need to make your mortgage payment. So the LLC or the corporation sends you money to your personal bank account. And then from your personal bank account, you make your mortgage payment on your homestead property. If you're pulling money from the company to make your mortgage payment, to pay your grocery bills. And then, from your personal account, you start paying corporate expenses and all that kind of stuff. That's where you get into the area of piercing the corporate veil. That's where lawyers can undo the liability protection of the corporate structure. So you need to make sure that you're doing those things properly. The corporation is its own entity. The LLC is its own entity. You are your own entity. And all of those are different pieces. But aside from that, they both provide liability protection. The difference between the LLC stands for limited liability company. Your liability is limited to your investment in the company. And so the corporation is you own stock, and you own stock in the corporation, and that provides its own level of liability, because to the extent the corporation does something wrong, you're just a shareholder. You own the stock in that company. The big difference is when you go to the IRS does not see the LLC. It is a disregarded entity, or it is a pass-through entity for tax purposes. So my law firm is an LLC. So if the law firm makes $100,000, then my 1040 shows $100,000 profit. And then my LLC has $40,000 of expenses. Now $40,000 of expenses flows on, and then I'm taxed on income of $60,000 from a very, very high level. And any CPA that's listening is probably yelling at their phone or wherever they're listening to the podcast right now. But that's very, very, very high level. The big difference between that and a corporation is double taxed. So the corporation has to pay tax on the income that it receives. And then when the corporation pays out money to the owner, that's a dividend. The owner pays tax on the dividend. So in the LLC, when the member takes a distribution, there is no tax. Everything just flows right onto their 1040 return, and they pay self-employment taxes. For the corporation, they're taxed twice. Once when the corporation makes the money, and once when the corporation pays out dividends. The corporation has to file its own tax return, where if it's a single member, simple LLC, everything flows through to the tax return of the owner, and the LLC doesn't necessarily file its own tax return. Now, when you talk about the difference between a C Corp and an S Corp, that's purely a tax issue, and that's something that the CPAs will expand upon. But basically what it does is it takes the corporation, whenever you form a corporation, it's a C corporation. If you go to the Secretary of State for the state of Florida, you form your corporation, it's a C corporation. You can then file paperwork to elect to be treated as an S corporation. And the distinction there is the S corporation is then treated like an LLC for tax purposes. It's a disregarded entity. And so everything just again flows through to the 1040 just like it would with an LLC. Now, one thing that I did with the law firm is an LLC. So the corporate designation for the law firm is a PL, which stands for Professional Limited Liability Company. Some people have said PLLC. All that means, what the state of Florida says, that designation of professional, the only other people that can own my LLC are other licensed attorneys. But that happens to be a rule of the Florida bar anyway. So sometimes realtors will form a PL, Professional Limited Liability Company, or a PA, a professional association. What that means is that only licensed members of the same profession can be owners of that corporation. So only realtors can own a PA that's started by a realtor. So, but in essence, my law firm is an LLC. We then elected to be taxed as a corporation, and then we elected to be taxed as an S corporation. So the net effect of all of this is that everything is still a flow through with my company, with my law firm. The difference, though, is it comes down to self-employment taxes. So I am an employee of my law firm, and my law firm pays me a salary. In fact, I just got paid today, as a matter of fact. I get paid at the end of the month. The law firm pays me a salary that's a reasonable salary for what I would do to run the law firm. And taxes are withheld, and Social Security is withheld, and all that stuff is withheld and gets sent off to the IRS, just like my legal assistants, just like my associate attorneys. And then if there's any money left over at the end of the month, I then get a membership distribution, which is a little bit of extra money. But what I'm doing is I'm lessening my self-employment taxes because I am treating myself as an employee, and I am actually banking away. So I get a tax refund every year, almost every year, because I'm sending money to the IRS to withhold. I actually just adjusted my withholdings so that I don't get as big a refund and I just get more in my paycheck during the year.
That is a lot, but that's
I
great.
know.
Good information, right?
Yeah.
I'm sitting here saying it going, when do I cut this off? How much
This is good
am I
stuff.
going too deep into all this stuff?
No, this is
No.
fantastic. So
Yeah,
if anybody has any questions about S Corps or LLCs, they can refer back to this episode, except if you're a CPA, then just ignore everything.
Although I do work with a couple of CPAs. And so, if you have questions, if you don't know a CPA, I can always refer a CPA, and I work well. There's a couple of them that I work really well with.
Great.
Now, do you yourself invest in real estate?
Sort of.
Now we have to ask what sort of is.
That's it's a typical attorney answer, right? So I did. I did at one point in my life. One of the things that I did in my career, one of the ways that I learned this area of the law was by working at a foreclosure mill. What that did, and by foreclosure mill, what I mean is representing banks foreclosing, taking houses away. But what that did is that then put me sort of on the front line of what was going on. So I saw the crash coming. And right around that same time, I met my wife. We got married. A year and a half later, we started having kids. And so I saw all of this on the horizon, and I just didn't feel like being a landlord. I didn't feel like, changing out, paying to change out air conditioners and roofs and unclogging toilets and collecting rents. I just didn't feel like doing it at that time with everything else I had going on. And so I decided to pull back, divest of all the real estate holdings that I had to help fund, getting married and having kids and doing all that other kind of stuff. So I do own my house right now, and I do plan to get back into the investing game. I need to start creating those additional lines of income and saving away for when the kids eventually go on to college. And I do believe in real estate as a really good investment. I just am focusing on the law firm and the podcast and all the other stuff I've got going on right now.
Hey, Shawn, what are some of the signs you saw that made you kind of take that position? Like, what do you recall any of the signs you saw that made you think, hey, I kind of see something coming here?
When your barber starts giving you real estate investment advice.
Yeah.
And I guess that's even more funny for someone like me that I can't recall the last time I saw a barber. But it was that kind of stuff. It was the one client that stands out, the sweetest lady. She's great. She was just the nicest lady you could imagine. I met her. She was a waitress at I forget, IHOP, Denny's, one of those types of places. She was a waitress there. And she got introduced to me because she was in foreclosure. And as I'm looking at it, she lived in about a $400,000 house that she bought as a waitress at IHOP or Denny's or wherever it was. And she was in foreclosure. She hadn't paid in months. She had like 8 or 9 people living with her. It was like a 5-bedroom, 4-bath house, like 3,500 square feet, something in that range. She had all these people living with her. She was the only one who worked, and she worked as a waitress at, IHOP. And she was able to afford this huge mortgage that she never had any chance of ever paying ever. And it was just because some mortgage person got a hold of her, put a mirror in front of her, she fogged it, and so he gave her a loan. And that's when I saw, I don't mean to degrade. I don't mean to make fun of people that are waitresses. That's not my intent. But just logistically, just from a financial perspective, somebody working as a waitress living on tips no way she should have been able to afford a $400,000 or $500,000 house. I got one. I remember one case that I got. So it was an investor that had picked up a piece of property and now was selling it because he needed a little bit of cash flow. So he sold this property. And I don't do closings anymore, but I've done closings since the beginning of my career, and I did this closing. And so he sold it to the person that was renting it from him to make a little bit of cash flow. Well, the bank said that the buyer could not get any cash back. And the way that the deal was structured, the buyer was going to get some cash back. It was about $900, $1,000, something small like that. And the bank said, because it's a tenant buyer, we can't do this as a cash out refi. They have to use up all the money. And I said, well, look, we're closing here in September. And in Florida, property taxes are due in November. The property taxes are about $1,100. So why don't I escrow the $900 for property taxes? And when it comes time to pay the property tax bill, the borrower can send me the $200 or I'll send him the $900 and then he pays his taxes. Everything's fine. Lender said, yep, that's a great story. That's a great idea. And so that's what we did. The next month, so this would have been September, October timeframe, I get a call from this particular buyer and he says, hey, can you send me the $900? And I said, well, it's not quite time to pay taxes yet. And he said, well, I'm not using it to pay taxes. And I said, well, then why are you going to use it? And he said, well, my tires went on my car. I need to buy new tires.
Wow.
Why? How can you buy a house when you don't have $900 saved up for an emergency when your tires go? It's just people were buying houses that they shouldn't have been buying, or maybe they weren't educated, or, I don't want to sound like I'm making fun of people. I don't want to sound like I'm putting anybody down, but you have a mortgage broker here that's taking advantage of this guy that doesn't have $900 in savings. So those were some of the signs that I saw that, it was time to, I guess I could have continued to be a landlord, but one of my houses was getting to the end of its life and the roof was getting to the end of its life in the AC unit. I just didn't feel like dealing with it.
Right. You deal with enough headaches as a lawyer, I'm guessing.
Yeah, you could say that. It was funny. I just learned today. I called my bank because I wanted to see if I was going to get an escrow refund. I'm due an escrow refund because of a drop in property taxes. And I called the bank and they said, yeah, but your loan's about to get service transferred. And I went, oh Lord, to who? And they told me who it was. And I'm dreading it right now because I've had plenty of battles with this particular servicing company. So we'll see. But the last thing you want to do is screw up the monthly accounting of a foreclosure defense attorney. So we'll see. maybe I'll catch the servicer in some kind of screw up and I will own my house free and clear. Who knows?
Now, there are a lot of smarter people than myself that are talking about how what was that?
And me.
Fair. They're saying that a crash is coming. And I've been hearing that, I guess, the last couple years. Are you seeing some of those same signs today? I
am starting to see some. There's a couple different things that I see on the horizon. Number one is student loans. So student loans are going to be a wave that comes. I mean, I've got student loans. I'll be paying my student loans for another 10 years. They're coming. They're not dischargeable yet in bankruptcy. There are some strategies that are coming out where we can sort of fight with them in bankruptcy court, but student loans are coming. People are graduating with, more student loan than they can afford. So that's one wave that's coming. The other wave that I see that's coming, what I used to say and what I still say today, when someone comes to me and they say, I want to do a loan modification. Okay, well, what's your long-term goal to be in the house? If they say, the kids are getting ready to graduate and we're going to downsize in 3 years, don't do a modification, because all you're going to do is take all that upside down equity or non-equity, stick it at the end of the loan. You're just kicking the can down the road. 3, 4, 5 years from now, you're still going to be in an upside down house that now you really want to get out of. If they come to me and they say, I'm going to be in this house forever, I'm going to retire in this house, the ambulance is going to come and pick me up and wheel me out of here, then fine, modify. Who cares? Who cares what happens to the value of the house if your goal is to be in that house long term? Well, now here we are in 2019. all these loan modifications, 12, 13, 14, 15, all these loan modifications are starting to get 5, 6, 7 years old. Now people that wanted to stay in the house 12, 13, 14, 15 that now want to get out of the house, but they're still upside down. So that's, I think, another wave that's coming. And I do see a little bit of a bubble forming. Subprime loans are back, although they're not, I forget what they're not called subprime anymore. They're called
like non-prime, I think, or something like that.
Something stupid, but subprimes are back. Some of these lending is relaxed a little bit. So I don't think it's going to be as bad as it was in 8, 9, 10, 11, 2008, 9, 10, 11. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I think there are still some old dinosaurs around like me that remember what it was like back then that may not let that happen. I think there's a correction coming, maybe the more accurate way to say it, not necessarily a bubble, but maybe a correction. And then when you've got student loans and when you've got, I overheard 2 attorneys talking the other day in bankruptcy court that the expectation is that bankruptcies will start to increase the end of this year, beginning of next year, into the middle of 2020. Bankruptcies will start to take off again. So I don't know. I think there's something coming. I mean, the economy is always a pendulum. Remember, I was an accounting graduate, not an economics graduate. So, I don't really take to economics. If you can't show me a printed receipt, I don't care. What the line that I heard about economists is that they've correctly predicted 5 of the last 3 downturns.
The thing about economists is, there's so many of them out there that just sort of contradict each other, and then you've got guys like Harry Dent who are always, saying the gloom and doom stuff. And eventually they're right. Like whenever the market goes down, then he's like, see, I've been saying it for 7 years.
Right.
Yeah, it's a cycle, man.
Broken clock is right 2 times a day or something like that.
Exactly. It is. It's a cycle. It's a pendulum. It swings back and forth all the time. And it's, like I said, accounting is a science. I can reconcile my checkbook every month. I can tell you to the penny what's in there. I can reconcile my law firm accounts. I can tell you to the penny what's in there. Economics is more of a theory. It's more of a, how do we predict what the market, and I get it. There's a science to it, but it's not, maybe bankruptcies increase 2020. Maybe the bankruptcies increase here in a couple months, maybe late 2020. Who knows? Maybe there's a bubble coming. Maybe there's a correction coming. I think there's something coming, but what is it and when will it hit? Who knows?
Yeah. So you talked about bankruptcy a couple times, and I think a question that some people who aren't familiar with the topic have around real estate investing and bankruptcy is whether or not you can still invest in real estate after you've declared bankruptcy.
Yeah, you can. So there's 2 different ways that people can invest in bankruptcy. One is you go directly to the bankruptcy trustee. So what you're looking for are Chapter 7 cases. Chapter 7 is liquidation. So in other words, anything that is not exempt gets turned into cash and that money gets paid to the creditors. Well, a lot of times within bankruptcy court, people file and they own multiple houses, or the house they're in is unaffordable and they decide to get rid of that house. Well, as soon as they decide to get rid of the house, it belongs to the bankruptcy trustee. The bankruptcy trustee is entitled to sell that property. I actually just saw, so here, it's an interesting situation. It was a guy who wanted to invest in association foreclosures, which is super, super dangerous because the association is subordinate to the first mortgage. So if you buy an association foreclosure, if you buy at the foreclosure sale that the association has brought, there's a first mortgage in front of you. So the only way to really do that right is to pay low amount. So you pay $5-6 grand, and that way you can throw a tenant in there for $1,000 a month for a year until the bank gets around to finishing its foreclosure, or you buy properties that are free and clear, other than the association lien. Those are really the only 2 ways to make money that I know of, buying association foreclosure sales. But the interesting thing that I saw, it was an investor that wanted to buy at a homeowner association foreclosure sale. But when I dug into it, the owner of the property that was about to lose it at the homeowner association foreclosure sale bought it from a Chapter 7 bankruptcy trustee. So the original mortgage holder filed bankruptcy. The trustee sold the house to this investor who threw a tenant in there, then stopped paying the association. Now the association is going to foreclose and take it away from the investor who bought it from the bankruptcy trustee. So it was like,
oh man,
a ton of issues coming in. But the other part of your question, can you invest in bankruptcy? Meaning if the investor files bankruptcy, can the investor still buy properties? Was that your question?
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes, although there's a couple of timelines we got to look out for. So if you're going to file Chapter 7, which is a liquidation bankruptcy, you probably want to wait till that thing's over, and then you can start buying properties. The good part there is, especially with, using other people's money and using seller financing and using creative techniques and creative negotiation techniques and doing all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you can definitely, once the Chapter 7 is completed, once the discharge is entered and everything is over, you're free and clear. You can invest in whatever you want. One of my best success stories was a husband and wife couple that filed bankruptcy. He was a realtor. She was a bookkeeper. She owned a bookkeeping company. We filed Chapter 7, got all their debts eliminated. He then found the international market. So he started focusing on international buyers and investors. Her bookkeeping business took off. Within 2 years of having received their bankruptcy discharge, they bought a house in Sarasota on a golf course for $300,000, almost all cash. He's, making money hand over fist, helping international investors. Her bookkeeping practice, she's got tons of clients. Once the bankruptcy was over, they were free and clear. They made a ton of money. If it's a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which is a payment plan bankruptcy, that one you got to be a little bit more careful about, because typically your Chapter 13 bankruptcies are 5 years in length. And so I think you can still continue to invest, but again, you might want to wait till after the bankruptcy is over, which is 5 years in some cases. If you start investing in properties while you're in the Chapter 13, the trustee gets your tax returns every year. So the trustee is going to see the increase in income, which may cause an increase in your bankruptcy payments to repay more to your unsecured creditors. Or if you're flipping houses and you're getting these big paychecks in, the trustee is definitely going to see that and ask that you pay more to your unsecured creditors. So if you're in the middle of a Chapter 13 and you're thinking about investing, I would hold off until it's over.
Fair enough. That makes a ton of sense. When should somebody think about declaring bankruptcy? I've never thought about when somebody should, so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so the way that I get asked that question a lot is, do I have enough debt to file for bankruptcy? And typically my response to that is, you only need to have more than you can afford to repay. So I've talked about this on my podcast for a couple of times. I've blogged about it. I've talked about it on other people's shows too. But if you think about somebody, I met with somebody today. They have $35,000 in debt, but they make $300,000 a year. They don't need to file. They can, we can tweak their budget here and there and come up with a way to repay the $35,000. But if you owe $35,000 and you make 50, maybe you're a better candidate for a bankruptcy, because there's no way you're going to pay $35,000 back on 50 a year. If you're 10 grand in debt and you make 35 a year, maybe you file. If you're 100, I have a client who is filed a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which I won't get into on the show, or maybe we'll record another show. We'll talk about all about Chapter 11, but he owes, I want to say his income is in the low six figures, 300, 400 a year, something in that range, I think.
Chump change.
But he owes 13 million.
Whoa.
So, it's all sort of kind of relative. It's you just need to have more than you can afford to repay. And I'm not the type of bankruptcy attorney that tries to fit that square peg in the round hole. If bankruptcy is not a good option for you, we'll settle it out. So this guy that owes $35,000 to Visa, let's, save up some money for a couple of months, pay him 10 to 15 grand and see if they'll go away based on that.
Yeah. Okay. This is cool. We're starting to get into a little bit around the debt piece of things. And, you know, sometimes I get the question from people, and I think several of us who are investors have run into people who are trying to decide if they should pay off their consumer debt before they invest in a rental property. A lot of people have some debt, and they're trying to decide, hey, should I pay that down before I start investing, or should I go ahead and start investing and then pay it down as I go? Um, do you have advice on that or thoughts in that area?
It's an interesting question, and I think I'm sort of the 6 of one, half dozen of the other camp. There's certainly a lot of investor techniques that you can buy without going to a bank. You don't need the Bank of Americas and the Wells Fargos and those guys to invest. And if that's your situation and you happen to carry some debt, who cares? Carry the debt, pay it down. One or two flips and it's paid off. Whatever you want to do. But if you're interested in traditional financing, I'm going to go put a line of credit on this house and then I'm going to use that line of credit to buy the next house. If you're going to do that kind of stuff and go the traditional, I'm going to go to Bank of America and ask them for a loan, then yeah, maybe you want to take care of that debt before you start investing. Although there's the whole other crowd of, what is it? Instead of ready, aim, fire, it's ready, fire, aim.
Yeah.
So, just go out and start investing and raise the money and pay off your debts and off you go. I'm not necessarily the Dave Ramsey type of, all debt's bad and never have debt and always pay cash. And I'm not that. Sometimes you need, want to buy something, I want to take my kids on vacation. I'm going to throw it on a card and pay it off. It's not so evil as long as you don't let it get out of control. So I think, I know one of your earlier episodes, one of your first episodes was on your investor identity. And I think this plays into that. Is your investor identity something that I'm going to carry some debt to fund these projects? If so, let the credit cards go as long as you're paying them. I don't mean let them go in terms of don't pay them. I mean, let them go in terms of, just keep rolling and paying them as they go. If your investor identity is other people's money and cash and all this other stuff, get rid of it, because then you're going to be conflicting with your own investor identity.
Yeah, makes sense.
Thanks for that shout out. And that's absolutely a different perspective of looking at it.
Yeah. Well, I told you I listened to the show.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
That's awesome.
What are the most common mistakes people make investing in real estate from a legal perspective, at least that you've seen?
I think the biggest mistake you have to remember, again, goes back to your investor identity. What do you want to invest in? And then I think the biggest mistake I see is treating people right or not treating people right, treating people the wrong way. So I'll tell the story this way. I had an investor client, one of my very first investor clients. He's still a client of mine. He's a really good guy, but he did a lot of subject twos. He did a lot of subject to transactions where you take the property subject to the existing mortgage, you take the responsibility, you continue to pay the existing mortgage. But he also left the former owners in the house. So he was in the mode of helping people. And so he would leave the owner in the house and then reduce what they were paying to him in rent below what they were paying to the bank in a mortgage. And so I got a call one day from an attorney who said, hey, I just had Mr. So-and-so in my office and your client bought his property subject to and left him in there. And Mr. So-and-so stopped paying rent. And now your investor client is trying to evict the former owner of the house. How is that fair? And I said, well, I happen to be the closing agent on that transaction. So your client got a brand new air conditioning system. He got a brand new roof. He got $5,000 cash, maybe $3,000, whatever. He got a couple grand cash. His mortgage became current. His payments on his lease were less than his mortgage payments. Explain to me again how your client was taken advantage of by mine. He said, let me get back to you. Click. And I never. So, do things the right way. Now, at the same time, if you're going to invest in subject to transactions, you cannot stop paying those mortgage payments. You have to. Otherwise, not only are you going to be harmed, but the person you took subject to is going to be harmed. And the analogy that I used to use, all the investors would say, well, we make them sign disclosures. Well, the analogy I used to use is, okay, I have a steel toe boot. I'm going to kick you in the shin as hard as I possibly can. But before I do, I'm going to make you sign a piece of paper that says, I'm going to kick you as hard as I can. And when I kick you as hard as I can, it's still a crime. I'm still breaking bones. It's still assault. Just the fact that you signed a piece of paper that said I was going to do it is sort of irrelevant here. So that was the analogy I used to use. So I think the biggest mistake I see investors make is just not treating people right. There's no reason to hide some of this stuff. There's no reason to hide that you're going to make a profit when you sell it. There's no reason to, just be honest with people, talk to them, help them out, do right by people, and 99% of the problems won't happen or will go away.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of investors get a bad reputation, or help spread a bad reputation for those of us who really see it as a great opportunity and are proud of it. It's those bad apples that do some of that stuff that kind of make the rest of us look bad.
Yeah, there was one investor that in the heyday of the meltdown ended up going to jail. Didn't serve a lot of time, was probably like a federal summer camp kind of thing, but went to jail, got out, and now I'm hearing his name circulating around again, and I'm like, he's not doing things correctly. Don't associate with him. And I won't get into defamation on air, but I'll let you guys know who it is next time we talk about it.
We would appreciate that heads up. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I don't think it's anyone you know.
Fair enough. I'm going to continue that down that path. Well, Shawn, that as you've listened to the episode about our investor identities, I invest in notes, and we're talking a lot about debt here. And one of the things that I'm learning, I'm finalizing a deal, is you can creatively invest or create note regarding debt or you loaning money out. What are you seeing in that regard?
I think you're onto something in that I don't think it's an area that a lot of investors are doing yet. When you talk to investors, especially newbie investors, it's all about the flips and the wholesaling and the selling contracts and lease options and all that kind of stuff. For some reason, a lot of new investors don't get involved in note buying. But the thing that I like about it is when I'm talking to a client and they say, I've fallen behind on my mortgage payments, but I really want to keep the house. Okay, well, who's your loan with? Well, it's with Wells Fargo. Okay, well, so here's all the things that Wells Fargo can do. They can drop the interest rate. They can re-amortize the loan. They can re-amortize a loan over 30 years or 40 years. They can re-amortize and balloon the loan. They can drop the principal balance. They can give you an opportunity to catch up on your payments. They can give you a forbearance plan where as long as you're paying them some money, they're not going to proceed with a foreclosure. There's all these different things that they can do. The question is, what will they do? And typically all they'll do is modify it under some kind of HAMP program, and you qualify or you don't, and that's it. Well, when you buy notes as the individual investor, you have a tremendous opportunity because you have all of those avenues available to you as well. So you can drop the principal balance. I mean, if it's a $100,000 note and you bought it for 45, but you can go to the homeowner and say, hey, listen, I'm going to drop your principal balance down to 80. You're still walking away with 40 grand plus interest at the end of the note. So you can drop principal balance. You can drop interest rates. You can re-amortize the loan. You can balloon them. You can do all the things that I talked about before. You can negotiate deeds in lieu. You can negotiate deficiency waivers. You can do all that kind of stuff. And so it's where I say to people, the banks don't necessarily think outside the box. Well, now you as the note investor can. And so even if you said, I picked up this note and I'm discounting it, but you're still going to make more than what you paid for it, and the banks don't see that, and maybe they can't. Maybe, maybe it's Bank of America is too big a beast to turn on a dime like that. Who knows? But that's why I like working with note investors because, when we have to foreclose, we'll foreclose. But outside of that, there's all these different opportunities that we have to structure this so that it's a win-win for everybody.
I love that. And that's the biggest reason why I got into note investing is because you can help people in times of need like that. Because as you know, life does happen. And if I have to choose between paying healthcare, for example, or a mortgage, I'm going to pay for my health, because if I don't have my health, then the mortgage is irrelevant anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. I think I'm going to go listen to our shiny object episode again to prevent me from getting into notes.
I love it.
Get in. Come on, dive in, get into notes.
I know, like it's so tempting. It's a shiny object for me, for sure. Shawn, let's talk a little bit about the Crushing Debt podcast. I know you're the host of a very popular podcast, Crushing Debt.
I think it's popular.
Yeah, I think it's a great podcast.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
So it's designed to support the law firm. So there's two different types of podcasters that you'll find. There's the podcasters that we're going to have our podcast because it's a passion project of ours. And then there's the podcasters like me that the podcast actually supports the law firm. I think you guys are maybe in that space right in the middle, because you both talk about the tech aspect of what you do. You both talk about the investing aspect of what you do. And so that's a lot of you might be in that middle ground. You may be that rare unicorn that's in the middle ground here, both of these. But mine is basically designed to support the law firm. So all the topics that I deal with on the Crushing Debt podcast are ways to get out of debt, strategies to get out of debt. I talk about foreclosures. I talk about bankruptcies. I talk about loan modifications, short sales, all that kind of stuff. Every once in a while, I take creative license and I say it's my podcast. I'll talk about what I want to talk about. So, for example, I do talk a lot about real estate investor topics on the show as well. And every 6 months, my association has a garage sale. And so one of the things that I enjoy doing is I'll focus on some aspect of sales, because in my mind, garage sales are very low pressure areas to practice your sales skills. And so I'll think of some area of sales that I want to do better in, and I'll practice that during the garage sale. And then when the garage sale's over, I'll do an episode about it. I've done an episode about why I do what I do, sort of like you did with investor identities and some of that kind of stuff. I'll off topic every once in a while and talk about some of that other stuff. But the main thrust of the bankruptcy of the Crushing Debt podcast is the areas of practice of the law firm. The latest episode that came out, I went through the mortgage, start to finish, a Fannie Mae mortgage, and I described what all the different clauses meant within the mortgage. I do have guests. Some of the shows are me alone. Some I have guests on where we'll talk about different. I've had probate attorneys on, personal injury attorneys on, investors, all different kinds of people on the show to talk about their areas, and we tie it back into Crushing Debt. And at this point, as we record this, next week is episode 156, which, if my math is right, is the end of year 3. So we'll be getting into year 4 of our episodes here, coming up here pretty soon, at least at the time we're recording this.
Wow, that's a milestone.
Yeah, I'm excited. It started out as a little passion project, and as podcasters, I don't know if you guys experienced this yet, but the first question that I always get asked is, well, how much money have you made? I've got clients now from the podcast. I've picked up clients from the podcast. I think the direction that I'd like to take it, the direction that it's seeming to shift to, is more of the how do I get out of debt? How do I budget to get out of debt? Those types of things. So some of those types of topics may be coming up more and more as we go into year 4 of budgeting and negotiating debt and that kind of stuff. But right now I enjoy it. I enjoy being in the podcaster community. I enjoy the meetups that we have. We got Podfest around the corner here. So it's one of the main networking aspects for the law firm is running the podcast.
I love it. We are going to be at Podfest next week. This time next week, we will be there.
Yeah.
This time next week, yes, we will be probably. I will be probably having some type of adult beverage in Orlando at Podfest.
Nice.
Same. Maybe we should do a podcast episode like that.
Yeah.
There's a couple of podcasts that deal with beers and drinking, and there are some that are out there that are like that.
That's fantastic. I can't be on the show with you and not ask you this question. So what's the craziest thing you've seen as a real estate attorney? Or I guess the dumbest thing somebody's done?
You know, I'm saving up these stories for an episode that I want to do about dumb things that banks have done. And I've got a bunch of them, but so far I've really only got 3 that I think were dumb enough to make it onto the possibility of being on the show. So, one of them, so I won't say the name of the bank, but it rhymes with L's Argo. So we were doing a short sale and we paid too much. So the short sale letter said, I don't remember the exact number. Short sale letter said $100,000, but we had some extra money. And whenever you have extra money, you got to send it into the bank, send it into us. So we sent them $100,030. We were $30 over what the approval letter said. So we sent them $30 too much. And so they called me and they said, we're going to kick back the wire. And I said, well, why? And they said, it's the wrong amount. I said, well, it's the wrong amount for too much. And they said, yeah, we can't keep this money. It doesn't match what's in the approval letter. And I said, well, can you send me $30 back? And they said, nope, we got to kick back the entire wire and you have to resend it in the correct amount. Over $30. Now, this was a conversation I told in a few seconds that took like a week. So think of all the money that Wells Fargo lost arguing with me over $30.
Man,
so that's one thing.
that's frustrating.
Another one, Deutsche Bank. The client wanted the house to be foreclosed and taken back. The client did not want the house anymore. They had instructed me not to fight the foreclosure. They had instructed me to file documents that said, motions in court that said we consent to the judgment, take the house back, which I did. Deutsche Bank still canceled the foreclosure sale to do a loan modification review.
Hey, I don't want this. Doesn't matter. Here you go.
Doesn't matter. We're giving you a loan mod. And it wasn't even to give him a loan mod. It was just to do the review on a house he didn't want to keep.
Man.
So they stopped the sale. And then the other one, this one was interesting. I just had this one. So a husband and wife, the husband files bankruptcy without the wife. And this is kind of complicated, but the husband filed bankruptcy. The wife did not, which is allowable, which is fine, which happens. The wife wanted to keep the house. So I went in and tried to modify the loan for the wife. In the mediation, it took us 4 times to finally get to mediation. It was that whole standard, we didn't get the document X in the middle of the package and your documents are stale. And it was the standard garbage that Aquin does. But then when we finally got to the last mediation session, Aquin said, well, we don't ever modify loans that are in bankruptcy. And I was like, well, yes, you do. I've done them before. Yes, you do. And she's, no, we don't. And so then I start getting all these offers from Aquin. Does your client want to modify her loan? And you said we couldn't because the husband had filed bankruptcy. You said we couldn't. And then after that, we ended up settling the case. But in the first version of the settlement agreement, it said that Aquin had offered loss mitigation options and the borrower refused the loss mitigation options. And I was like, guys, that's the total backwards opposite of what actually happened. We can't, it made no sense to me. I had another one that I could think of where Florida has a speedy foreclosure statute. So right when the meltdown happened, the banks pushed for a statute that would allow banks to use a summary procedure to speed up the foreclosure case. No bank has ever used it that I know of, by the way. It's been in place now for like 7-8 years. No bank has ever used it, except this one bank that tried to use it. So they filed the documents to get the hearing based on the summary procedure. Then they scheduled a second hearing based on the summary procedure. Then they canceled the first hearing. Then they canceled the second hearing. And then they started moving forward on a regular track, and I kept it delayed for a couple of years. So they tried to use the procedure to move it quickly. They didn't know what they were doing. They canceled all their hearings and they went back to the old way of doing it.
Man, dealing with some of these banks just sounds so frustrating sometimes.
Sometimes it is super. Something happened to me today that I don't even remember. It was just so dumb. I don't even remember what it was.
A lot of it is just these big companies, and they've got some policies that have been in place so long, people have forgotten why they're there, and you've got silos of departments that won't talk to each other and all kinds of interesting dynamics.
Exactly. So but that's why I'm here, to try to help them wade through that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's cool. Thanks for sharing that, because, a lot of people don't get to see or hear about those things every day. I mean, unless they're an attorney who does those kind of things. So it's interesting to hear about those kind of things when you're not exposed to them all the time.
Yeah. And it's maybe I'll get that goofy things banks have done episode out sooner rather than later, now that I've got 4 stories saved up here.
Yeah. I think your listeners would love to hear it.
We're glad we could help.
Yeah.
So, Shawn, it's been great having you on. We really got a lot of value out of you coming on the show, and we really appreciate your time. Where can folks learn more about you?
The easiest place, everything funnels back to the law firm's website, which is yesnerlaw.com. And there's only one S in Yesner, YESNER law.com. But everything funnels back there. So all of my blogs are there. You can get all the podcast episodes there. I'm also on, like you guys, I'm on Apple and Spotify and Stitcher, and all the artificial intelligence ladies love me, the Alexas and Siris. In fact, I probably shouldn't have said that too loud. She's probably going to start yelling at me now. But they all love me. So you can find the podcast wherever you listen to, your favorite podcast. But I try to keep everything funneled, all the social media funnels back to the website, all that stuff. And it's just yesnerlaw.com.
Okay, yesnerlaw.com, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, don't forget to get the book.
Yeah, and the book too, the Crushing Debt book, which is also on Amazon. I have been saying on my show, which I'll say the same thing on your show, if any of your listeners want it, then what I would like in return is a review of the law firm on social media. So go to Facebook, go to Google, leave me a review, take a snapshot, somehow get that review that you left to me, and I will say thank you by sending a book.
Wow, that's an amazing deal.
So as long as it's an honest review, I won't ask for a positive review. I can't ask for a positive review, but I'll ask for an honest review.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a great deal. So, thanks again, Shawn. We've really enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Shawn.
That's it for this episode of Tech Guys Who Invest. This is Adam.
And this is Kevin. Thank you so much for listening to us. Don't forget to join our Facebook page, where we're building a community of investors so that we can share ideas, tips, and other ways to help us get out of the rat race. If you found value in this podcast, it would mean the world to us if you could share it with your network. Lastly, we love feedback. It's how we get better. So if you wouldn't mind spending 30 seconds and leaving us an honest review on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever platform you're using, that would be super sweet. If you want to get on Adam or Kevin's calendar, go to tgwipodcast.com/contact. We want to help you invest safely, wisely, and ultimately get you out of the rat race. Thanks again.